Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Human in the Machine, the podcast about all things human-computer interaction. I'm your host, Professor Ben Cowan. Today's episode's one from the archives. During the COVID pandemic, we had a number of leading HCI researchers talk to us remotely about their work. These recordings mean a lot to me as they kept me going through those times, but also they have some amazing insights about the world of HCI. The one for this episode is a talk by Dr Julie Williamson from the School of Computer Science at the University of Glasgow. Julie's a great friend of ours at HCI at UCD, and it was brilliant to have her talk to us about her work on virtual and immersive interactions in public and real-world settings. So Julie's not only a great friend, but she's also a world authority in all things virtual reality, extended reality and immersion. She's really involved in the Association for Computing Machinery's SIGCHI community, which is the main international HCI professional and research body, and recently won a European Research Council Consolidator grant called Fusion to study interaction stability and social interaction in extended reality. In this episode, Julie tells us about her work with the National Theatre of Scotland and through the Edinburgh Festival, as well as her views on the future of immersive worlds. So there's a bit of background noise here as we are recording remotely, so bear with us with that. But so from California to Glasgow, and now to you, enjoy.
So I've been primarily concerned with immersive technologies for the last few years, and so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Not only some of the kind of interesting problems that I care about, but also a little bit of my hopes or fears for the future of immersive technology. And so I've been really interested in kind of the social dynamics of immersive technology. So how do you kind of balance, immersion with kind of the environment around you and the spectators that are there, but also kind of how do we start bringing these technologies into real world settings and what are the challenges with that? So I do a lot of work with kind of entertainment and kind of live performance and immersive tech. And so I'll talk about a few of those projects. But you may be wondering a little bit, how does someone fall down this immersive technology rabbit hole? And so I'll give a little bit of my background, kind of how I became a researcher in HCI. So I'm originally from California, and I went to University of California in Irvine, where I studied my degree program informatics. Now that's a term that's a little bit overloaded and kind of used in different ways, but basically that degree program was kind of, 1/3 computing, 1/3 design, 1/3, psychology, sociology. So it really kind of set people in that program up for a career in HCI to kind of care about that balance between, the technical constraints and the human constraints. And after that, I went on to do my PhD in the University of Glasgow, where I focused on gesture-based interaction, and especially the kind of social acceptance of moving our body in weird and strange ways in public spaces as an interaction technique. And what really kind of intrigued me about that was this interaction in public and social settings. And kind of since then, I've really focused on basically unusual technologies in public and social settings. And after I finished my PhD, that is when the kind of challenge and the kind of shift in an academic career comes about, because instead of working on a kind of annual cycle and thinking, 1 year ahead, those deadlines that are right on the horizon, you have to really start thinking a little bit longer term and thinking, what's going to sustain my curiosity, not just for a year or a few years, but 5 or 10 years. What's a kind of longer term, bigger problem that can start to address? And so I actually changed my topics a little bit. I moved around I was really sick of gesture by the end of my PhD. If you're not, completely tired of the topic that you've worked on from your, academic, your degrees, then I don't know, you're very lucky, but I was sick of it. And I moved on towards kind of public displays and some more technologies embedded in public settings. I started working with spherical displays, which I really enjoyed. And from there, kind of made the leap into immersive technology from kind of 360 content on spherical displays. So it was a little bit of a random walk, which now I can say was all about technology in public spaces. But that kind of embedding things into real world settings has been the kind of thread that kind of kept my curiosity moving as I kind of went into my academic career. And so I want to kind of show one of my first starting points. And when I first started thinking about VR specifically, it goes back to Glasgow Short Film Festival. I think this was actually probably around 2015. And we were there at the Glasgow Film Festival. You might see this as a bar, and we were there watching short films, 360 films on VR headsets. And I thought this was really a fun setting. We were all in a bar having fun, having some drinks, watching 360 videos together, kind of also laughing, about the people who were in VR. And it was really great. And in that setting, VR totally worked. I think people knew we were part of the festival and we were all having fun. But I was kind of thinking, this is my first experience of VR in a public setting, and it works, but this is a very constrained setting. And so I really wanted to think a lot more broadly, how could VR is going to come, immersive technology is going to come to our physical settings, to our real lives. What is that going to look like, and how can that work as we move forward in the future? And so since about that time, I've been really obsessed with virtual reality, immersive technology more broadly, and actually thinking about this spectrum of, reality to virtuality, and where the technology is going to sit. And hopefully it'll sit in a fluid space in that spectrum of immersive content, but it doesn't currently. So, a couple of years later, we're also doing some of these kind of more, almost like a kind of experiments of just, seeing what happens if we go and we use technology in public settings. So at CHI, when the conference was in Glasgow in 2019, we ran a workshop on VR for public and social settings. And we actually went out to kind of local restaurants, and we all sat in our VR headsets and had our lunch and did different things. And again, we can kind of see that technically this completely works. These are Oculus Go headsets. They have 3 degrees of freedom tracking, and it works, right? But it attracts a lot of attention. Some people were really intrigued about what we were doing. Some people were a little bit horrified about what we were doing, didn't want to come too close to us. And so it really shows that the technology might be there, but our designs for that technology and our kind of applications for that technology are not quite ready yet. And so we've been looking at a lot of different ways, what are the entry points for immersive tech in real settings? And so one example, which I'll just talk really briefly about, but that I really like, was this work that I did with some of my colleagues in Swansea. And in this case, you see this kind of display enclosure, and it looks like kind of one of these, it's designed to look like one of these like seaside telescopes. And the idea behind it was the affordance is so clearly there. It's something that you walk up to and you kind of look into. But when you look into this, it actually is a VR headset that's kind of embedded in this device. And in this case, we were designing this so that to look at a kind of historical site that no longer really existed. So like many places in the UK, Swansea is the site of a disused industrial site, a copperwork site, which now is quite grim and actually a little bit of a horrible place. But, it's this important industrial site that's a huge part of the identity of people in Swansea who worked at the copperworks, and it was a huge part of the growth of that city. Similarly in Glasgow, we have the shipyards, which, post-industrial collapse, now they're these horrible kind of places, but they're actually hugely important for like local identity and why the city grew the way it did. So in this particular installation, it's called Telescoper. It was sited on the copperwork site. And when you look into the telescope, it actually shows you what the site looked like when it was in its prime, to kind of get people engaged in the history of the place and kind of remember what the site looked like. So in this case, it's I don't have the picture of it on the actual site. The actual site is waste ground. I mean, it's kind of sad looking, and there's like a crumbling building. And we had it out in front of the museum, and we had it on the waste ground later. But it just kind of shows, in this case, this was designed to be an unstewarded VR installation, and in this kind of bolted to the ground, enclosure. Actually, VR can be in a public space. It's completely feasible, and with just the right positioning and kind of the right content, it actually can fit quite well. But that's kind of bolted to the ground. That's a 3 degrees of freedom tracking. What about kind of room scale VR? In this case, we really wanted to try something a bit, flex our creative muscles a little bit. And I worked with my longtime collaborators in this project, Dennis and Debbie Club, who are an artist duo working on immersive art. we wanted to see, how would a room scale VR kind of work? And we went into the festival setting again. So this was at the Edinburgh Festival in the virtual reality studio. So I had these giant kind of tent things on Princess Street. And we had just basically a open brief, create something that uses room scale VR. You have, this amount of space on the floor. And what we really wanted was for people to physically walk around and use their bodies and explore the space. That's the interesting part of VR, that you can walk and you're embodied in this experience. And so from my perspective, I was like, oh, we can design a task. We can maybe get people to do this, get people to, but Dennis and Debbie, coming from kind of fine arts, had a slightly different idea, and they wanted to do something more in terms of the kind of affordances of the environment and what the application looked like, instead of kind of having a structured experience. And this ended up working really well. And we came up with this particular game, I guess you could call it. And the idea is that basically you have 10 minutes alone in the Oval Office, and it's a destructible environment. And you can kind of see from the content, this was during a specific period in American history. And, the environment was destructible, and you could just go and kind of tear the place up, and kind of a cathartic, experience. There's a shredder in the corner there. You could throw stuff in it and it would explode and things like that. But the main thing that Dennis and Debbie were really keen about having here was that, all the drawers open, you could pull the cushions off of the couches. There was like funny stuff like under the desk. And we wanted people to do this, to kind of get that experience of like rifling through the drawers, of, crawling under the desk, and to use their bodies in this space by giving the environment these affordances. And so this particular, application was very much, we didn't have any structure to it, but we did see that people would be kind of crawling under the desk. There was kind of funny stuff under there, and, tearing up the cushions and really getting their whole body there, walking around in this space. And we specifically didn't use teleportation in this application, so that people had to kind of like walk. So it was quite a fun experience for the spectators who would be watching on a display and kind of seeing people doing these funny things. But also, as I say, the environment was designed to kind of poke a bit of fun. But, that was kind of one of our first room scale experiences. But the next project that I want to talk about is kind of a little bit different. And this is work that I did in collaboration with National Theatre Scotland. And this was really focusing on live performance and immersive theatre. So in this case, we had a kind of person from theatre, a person from kind of production and design, and myself kind of as a technologist, working to put together an immersive experience. And this was a really nice kind of trio, because we all had kind of similar issues we were interested in, but very different language for talking about it. So, for example, I was very interested in the kind of transitions and the thresholds kind of between reality and the virtual part of this experience. And, the kind of production and design person thought about that in terms of kind of choreography. What was it like to move through different spaces and communicate that to the audiences? So it was really nice. We did this work based on some of the writings of John Berger, and that was some of the monologues that the kind of the guy from theatre wanted to focus on. So I'll just walk you through what the experience was like and kind of where we made some of the design decisions that I really enjoyed. So as you enter the space, you're greeted by the first steward, and the kind of presence of stewards and kind of live performance was a key part of how we wanted to guide people through this experience. So you'll see the kind of continued use of stewards throughout. You're greeted by a steward who gives you either a white or black marble. And once you enter then into the actual performance space, there's a row of chairs and you sit. Once you are there, you see the kind of row of chairs at the back wall here. You're presented with a black cube and a white cube in front of you. And the guy you see here was given kind of some live performance and live monologue to start the event. And I'm here as one of the stewards. And so you're there seeing kind of a bit of a live performance. And this is sort of what we might think of as like the first act of the experience. Once you experience that first segment, based on the marble that's in your hand, you either go into the white cube or you go into the black cube. And these were the spaces where we were hoping to kind of create these thresholds between real and virtual content. So once you're invited into one of the cubes, there's chairs and headsets waiting for you there. Now, when we talk about kind of the transition into virtual content, it can be quite jarring. It can be quite confusing, especially for users who are not accustomed to some of the practicalities of, getting into VR, orientating themselves, this kind of thing. So in this case, this was the part I was very keen in. And what is this threshold? What does this kind of transition from real to virtual look like? So as you go, let's say, into the white cube, you go in there and you sit in your chair and you're facing one of the white walls. The first thing you see when you go into VR is that exact setting reproduced in the virtual environment. So you're sitting there in this white cube, and the kind of experience begins to unfold. There's some narration and animation and other things, but as the experience unfolds, parts of that virtual environment start kind of deconfiguring themselves until you found yourself on a hilltop with a kind of tree that was swaying, because obviously it's not constrained by physical issues, so the kind of environment can reconfigure itself. Then, as the kind of virtual part of the experience ends, the environment reconfigures itself and you're back in the white cube, after which point you remove the headset to again find yourself in the white cube. So we wanted to play with these transitions and make them feel as continuous as possible, rather than kind of a wall coming down when you go into the virtual and then a bit of a shock when you exit. And stewards were also involved in the white cubes. So I, for example, was in the white cube for my part of the study, or for my part of the performance, kind of guiding users in and out of VR. And so stewards were also kind of used throughout the performance. And I really enjoyed this type of work. And I think festivals and places like this, liminal spaces, are really interesting places where people are willing to kind of go into VR and experience things for the first time. But not all of the work is some of this more kind of festival-based, kind of more creative things. One of the applications that I've also done a lot of work on is VR for use while traveling or in transit. And particularly some of the early stuff was focusing on airplanes, which is slightly less relevant in this day of travel limitations. But the kind of key thing that I really like, that I want to highlight about this project, is about moving towards a more mixed reality and moving towards spaces where we can kind of continuously move through more or less reality virtuality. So I'll just talk really quickly about what I liked about this application. In this case, you're kind of immersed in this living room environment. You'd be sitting there and watching TV or whatever, the typical thing you would take part in on an airplane or any place where you want to kind of escape out of that environment and have some entertainment. But in this case, the two mirrors that you see on either side of the display, actually, if you look at one of those mirrors, it shows you the pass-through view out the front of the headset. So this is a really light touch way of kind of re-engaging with reality. You can check in with what's going on outside, and you can easily disengage from it as well. And even though this particular application is relatively simple, for me, it was kind of the first step down this path that I've been interested in, of moving towards a more continuous kind of reality, virtuality space. And when would I choose to, for example, dial up reality, and when would I choose to dial down reality? I think we need to be moving in this kind of space continuously in the future in order to actually find these technologies in our real environments. One of the last kind of big projects that I want to talk about is also thinking about how we behave in virtual environments. Given my obsession with immersive technology, you probably won't be surprised that I'm also equally obsessed with everything to do with metaverse and life in virtual environments. even though I don't know how many people watched the metaverse announcement, quite a lot of it was hard to watch. It's very overproduced, but I think it highlights exactly the challenges and issues that researchers outside of industry face when we deal with a possible future where immersive technology is kind of part of our lives. And so kind of another strand of my work is all around behavior in virtual environments and how can we design these virtual environments to better facilitate kind of social interaction. I think all of us have probably missed that kind of meaningful social contact, and things like Zoom, and this is Mozilla Hubs, for example, we are, in my opinion, still very far away from making that kind of as meaningful as some of the other things we experienced before lockdown. But this was just an example of some of the work I've been doing in analyzing behavior in virtual environments. Over, when was this? In March, May of 2020, we ran a workshop using Mozilla Hubs. And because Mozilla Hubs is open source, for better or for worse, you can instrument the environment with a lot of tracking and logging. And so what we do is we actually log in real time at 50 or 60 frames per second, the full orientation, position, and some other metrics about everyone who's in the virtual environment. And from this, we can actually do some really nice visualizations and understand a little bit more about behavior. So what I want to actually show is this. This is kind of what the data looks like in a really sped up format. But we can start to understand kind of what are people's typical, standing distance in virtual environments. For example, do we respect things like personal space? Do the kind of rules of proxemics that we know from physical environments? So, for example, people will often not stand closer than arm's distance apart. This is the kind of physical space that I might choose to take up. Do those same rules apply in a virtual environment? How much space do we need for large groups of people to gather, or is it uncomfortable when people kind of stand too close? We also wanted to look at things like how do people orientate their bodies in a virtual environment? Do we still give off the same type of social cues and social signals that we expect to have in a physical environment, and that, for example, we're often missing in things like Zoom, where we have kind of only partial social signals? And so we did quite a lot of analysis of people's standing behavior and their body orientation. But one of the new things that we have added in our kind of ongoing work in this area is also analysis of how people orientate their bodies and attend to active speakers. So for example, I'll show this visualization, which needs a little bit of explanation. So this kind of radial plot, the kind of person is standing at the center and all the other people are kind of arranged around them how they would be standing. And on the left, this is when we are on a desktop PC. In the last bit, the red dots are active speakers and the gray dots are people who are just listening. And we see on PC that actually people don't always turn to face the active speaker. You can use Mozilla Hubs in embodied VR or on PC. And we see they don't give off the same kind of social signals. They don't turn to face the active speaker. And so there's something that's like really missing actually from that interaction. If we look at the right-hand side, this is people who are in VR headsets, and you see the active speaker is within that kind of field of view most of the time. People turn to face the active speaker, and we see a lot more kind of cohesion amongst kind of small groups when they form and have discussions in Mozilla Hubs. Now, it's kind of still part of our ongoing analysis. So it's kind of, I don't have any definitive kind of description of how much this changes how this interaction feels. But my hypothesis is that it is going to make a huge difference, even in things as small as how easy it is to do turn taking, which we know is quite hard on some of our other platforms. But then kind of going further along, I do hope that giving off more of these social signals, having these different types of experiences in a virtual environment as compared to, something like Zoom or just teleconference, that it adds something in terms of making that a more meaningful social contact. But this is part of the ongoing analysis, part of the open questions. And certainly, I've been really inspired by some of the some of the data that we've been able to gather in these virtual environments using Mozilla Hubs. So the last couple of things that I do want to talk about is a bit more my hopes and fears for the future of immersive tech. So I did mention that one of the things I'm really interested in is moving towards a more continuous type of interaction between full virtual reality and full reality. And one of the examples of this is a product that I really think is quite intriguing, which is the Quest headset. This is the kind of mixed reality keyboard that's available for Oculus Quest. And you can kind of see that there's, the keyboard there, that's a physical keyboard that you can like pick up and, use. But as you kind of move your hands towards it, your real hands, those are my physical hands. They're a bit of a ghostly look. I mean, the visual fidelity is not fully there, but it's the type of thing that I think we're really moving towards in a way that is going to change the way we interact with these devices. In this case, there's no, active trigger or anything that I need to do. It's just as I move towards the keyboard, my physical hands kind of come into view. So this is a really nice example of things moving towards that kind of continuous and kind of implicit movement between full VR and reality. And I think we'll see more and more of these devices as we see things that kind of come onto the market and come out into our real world experiences. So my main kind of challenges and questions that I'm thinking about these days are these transitions between physical and virtual. The work that we did with National Theatre Scotland was really part of my work there, was really focusing on that kind of transition and that step. And it's just opened up a million more questions than answers, kind of creating those first prototypes. Especially when we think about, what's the experience of moving between different levels of reality and virtuality, and how are we going to differentiate between real and physical and virtual content. We are going to be experiencing these types of transitions more and more as we go. We already have some of these types of devices that kind of give us more control over our environment around us. And so it's a continuous progression towards something more like this, where we have actual seamlessly integrated virtual content in our physical environments. So I'm quite keen, particularly here around, what that means for our experiences as we have more and more control over our reality. The kind of way that I've been thinking about this is that, immersive technologies are substantially different than other things that we've experienced in the past. Because unlike, a mobile phone or a wearable, watch or something like that, those devices exist within our world, but immersive devices exist kind of between our world and our perception. So I think this is a really fundamental shift. It's actually going to be changing the kind of stimulus that we receive and the things that we're experiencing. And it's really interesting, and it creates lots of interesting problems. One of the big challenges of this whole setup is that this possible kind of future, this near future, doesn't quite exist yet. So we aren't in a world where everyone's wearing immersive devices. Thankfully, we're not in this world, although this is a real photo. But we're not in that world yet. So we still have quite a lot of room for speculative design, for kind of changing the course of how immersive tech becomes integrated in our lives. And so it's a real open challenge of how do we design and how do we answer questions about things that don't quite exist yet. And so for my part, we do a lot of work with kind of more experienced prototypes, and more creating kind of design fictions with some working parts, for example, and just doing a lot of speculative work, trying to think, what's going to happen in this world where our perceptions are now mediated by immersive technologies. So I'm not sure where the future is going to go, but I'm kind of structuring my future work in immersive tech around these kind of themes. And so what I'm really keen to think about is always on immersive devices. And these are not so far off as you might think. always on immersive devices are already starting to be present. So you might see the first photo, here's Magic Leap. This is a ridiculous looking thing to wear. I'm not going to be walking down the street with any normal, without getting some strange attention. But the device on the right, actually, that is an immersive device. This is the Bose frames. Besides being someone who's too cool to wear sunglasses at night, these are an audio immersive device. So it's just the audio channel, but this is an always on immersive device. I've had a lot of really strange experiences wearing these out and about, some good and some bad. So for example, I was wearing my Bose frames and I was sitting at a table listening to music, just kind of zoning out, having a good time. And someone kind of came up to me and was talking to me, and I thought they wanted money or something. And I was like, no, sorry, go away, whatever, trying to be polite. And they didn't realize I couldn't hear anything they were saying. I must have seemed really rude. And so they kept persisting. I was like, and I was trying to figure out how to stop my music. And it turns out they just wanted the other chair at my table. And so I looked like a real jerk. They must have thought I was really, really just full of myself. And so that was quite a bad experience of kind of cutting myself off partially from reality in a way that was not visible to other people. But using the same device, one of the other things that I used to do was listen to the walking directions from Google Maps. And this was something, again, I could do in a completely hidden way. And so one time I was with some colleagues, I was in an unfamiliar place, and I just started leading the way to where we were going for dinner. And everyone just thought I knew where we were going. I'm walking along and hearing the walking directions. They're really good in Google Maps, and especially using something like this, which is completely hidden and eyes free. And as we walked up to the restaurant, I was like, oh, usually she says we've arrived, but I think this is the place. I see the sign. People are like, what are you talking about? She says what? I was like, oh, I've been listening to the walking directions. Nobody realized that I was doing that. And I just looked, really competent. So that was a nice example of kind of augmenting my capabilities in a way that, was a good experience for me as well. But the Bose frames are kind of interesting, but actually they have discontinued that project. And now the new one that we have to deal with is these are the Ray-Ban stories. So this is a kind of interesting shift. It's similar to the Bose frames, although they don't have the 3 degrees of freedom tracking, which is a little bit of a downside. But there's 2 cameras on the front of these devices. And how people feel about cameras and what if I started recording you guys from here? It's a lot of interesting issues, but the cameras are completely hidden. They're these really nicely hidden in the detail in the front of the device. So that's why I'm saying, immersive devices are here. And when I'm out and about, I typically will be wearing, something. So I wear my stories quite regularly. When the frames were still supported, I wore those. And we do start to have these interesting collisions kind of between immersive and physical content already with the devices we have. So I'm preparing for this future where we have these always on immersive devices. Right now, most of them are more the audio channel, but we will have things that have the visual channel as well as we move forward to the future. That kind of brings me to the next challenge that I'm really interested in, which is this reality where we kind of seamlessly blend physical and virtual content. And that is the place where I think a lot of the interesting problems arise and interesting challenges, especially when we get to a place where the kind of seams between physical and virtual become less and less visible. And we have a real challenge here that in some ways, it's a good thing to have more control over our reality that we live in. It has serious implications for how we experience and remember our lives. So we could be very much in a situation where we walk down the street together, but we're experiencing materially different realities. That, of course, already happens to some extent. We don't attend to the same things. We maybe interpret and understand things differently. But as we move to this immersive future, we may be also experiencing a completely different set of stimuli. So there's a lot of really interesting challenges that come up there. I think immersive researchers have their work cut out for them in that sense. And the final issue, which I'm also very interested and concerned about, is the kind of ethics and how we do responsible immersion. What types of ethical challenges does this raise? How do we protect individuals? And, how do we think about the impact that immersive technology will have on our lives? There's, of course, numerous dystopian scenarios that you can think of, but there's also one of the challenges that I have given myself and my collaborators. I still do a lot of work with Dennis and Debbie Club, is we try to think of what are the kind of utopian scenarios as well. So there's a lot of interesting challenges there. I don't know what the future holds for immersive tech, but I'm intrigued and I'm here for it.
Thanks very much, Julie, for that great talk, and thanks to you for listening. If you'd like what you hear, please drop us a review and follow us. All that's left for me to say is this is the Human in the Machine podcast. I've been your host, Ben Cowan. Stay curious and don't let the machines get you down. Until next time.